Welcome back, Canon Catholic. I'm gonna try and keep going further and further with the French Revolution today. Try and really get to where it all really started, especially the violent outbursts. So, speaking of that violent outburst, how do you think their revolution probably compared to our revolution? I mean, we're doing a lot of research on ours right now for this video project that you're creating, and as you can tell, our revolution is very diplomatic in a sense, right? It's very several documents were written. It's a lot about taxing, and it's a lot about kind of just small scale things until you get to the war, which was very intense. Now, however, the French Revolution is completely different. It has to do with oppression and hundreds of years worth of it at that. Now, this could be, and it's also extremely violent by comparison. This could be for a number of reasons. It could be because the industrialized amount of the French society post-industrial revolution was really affected by different tax structures. It could do with the amount of debt that France was in due to endorsing the American Revolution. It could do with just population density. It could do with tons of different things, right? So let's go ahead and get into it, though. And we talked about the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate, the clergy, the nobles, and then everybody else, right? So now here's where it gets a little complicated. Within the third estate, which is everybody else, there are three types of people, okay? So there are three types of everybody else, right? So the third estate is made up of the bourgeoisie, which are the prosperous bankers, merchants, lawyers, doctors, manufacturers, all those guys, right? They are the wealthy part of the third estate. Very wealthy, in fact. And then you have the bulk of the third estate, which is the rural peasants, right? Now, that's farmers, tenant farmers, day laborers, just everyday working people that live in the countryside. Urban workers are also, though, in the third estate, and they're at the very bottom. They are the poorest members, the unemployed, the street vendors, the printers, the people that work inside of the factories, right? So, now, the big, really messed up thing with the French society, as we've been looking at so far, is out of all the estates, who are the only ones that get taxed? Good job, Annie. The third estate is the only taxed one, right? They pay taxes on everything. So the first and second estate pay almost no taxes. The nobility pays a small amount, but it's usually in farm products and other goods that are created on their land. Now, the third estate is greatly disliked, or they can't stand the first and second estate. There's a lot of class resentment here because they pay taxes on everything from soap all the way down to salt, right? So anyway, now, the Enlightenment is going to have a heavy impact on the French Revolution, right? So, social equality ideas from Voltaire, J.J. Rosé, and Diderot are going to really be impactful. So, this is Rousseau over here to the left. Now, his big contributions, of course, were the social contract and the general will, right? The idea that if your society is upset, then you have the right to overthrow your government, right? So, then you have Voltaire over here, the constant satirist, the one that made fun of the French society and the fact that they endorsed the royal family that wasn't giving anything back to them. And then also Diderot. Now, Diderot's major impact, of course, with the encyclopedia release is mainly because he gave knowledge to all classes, right? He believed that everyone, every class should have access to intelligence. So, major contributor. And when a society is smarter, they start to really look at their lives and decide we need to change these things, right? So, now, the American Revolution also is going to be a huge impact, right? The French aided the American Revolution with soldiers and a naval fleet, right? The French soldiers and the French people were inspired by American revolutionary ideas, the idea of cutting away your diplomatic ties and striking out on your own, right? So, which estate was really inspired by this? Good job, O'Donnell. The third estate was, right? The idea that we can overthrow this almost imperialistic-like government and actually establish one of our own, right? So, this was a huge thing, inspired by huge guys like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, right? So, continuing forward, though, financial troubles were also a huge problem in France at the time. So, now this is mainly caused by a thing called deficit spending, okay? So, for example, with deficit spending, imagine a credit card, right? If I have a credit card and I'm swiping it and I'm getting things, right? Did I actually pay for them? No, I didn't. I owe that place money. Right? So deficit spending is when a government spends more than it earns, okay? So national debt is going to soar because wars, helping the American Revolution, and it's going to force them to borrow money from other countries. Now, Bad harvests also was a really big problem. They actually made food costs go way, way up because there were 2 straight years of really, really bad weather conditions that caused really bad harvests. So if you have higher food costs, less money for the poor, and that gives them less money to pay taxes with, right? It's a big, big domino effect. And then the first and second estates during this entire thing still refused to pay taxes. Now, if you look at the first estate, they could have solved this financial crisis like that because they own 10% of all the land in France and they are just raking in money through tithes, right? Now, the second estate also has a huge amount of money left over in land deeds and also in other in feudal contracts, things like that, right? So this all could have been solved if the first and second estate would have just gotten involved, right? But they didn't because they're all buddy-buddy with who? Exactly. With Louis the 16th, right? Now, bad kings sent France into further debt. So you've got Louis the 14th, right, the Sun King, who spent most of France's money on his palace. You've got Louis the 15th, who endorsed the American Revolution and spent money he didn't have to try and get them to break away from Britain just because France didn't like Britain. And then you've got Louis the 16th, right? Now remember, Louis the 16th is a very awkward cat. He doesn't really know how to fix things. He's not good at being king, but he's not bad. He's not a mean guy. So he calls the Estates General, right? Now, the Estates General is the French version of Congress. I think that we've talked about this before. Now, it's a council of representatives from each estate. That's supposed to say estate. All about financial reform, okay? So the first, second, and third estate send their representatives, okay? And they're trying to figure out how to reform tax law, okay? So Louis the 16th had each class make out these things called cahiers, right? Now, a cahier is a notebook full of complaints. Now, the first estate would probably complain like, oh, we ran out of Eucharist cookies. And then the second estate would probably complain about, oh, we got all these smelly poor people that work on our farms. And then the third estate in all capital letters was just taxes, right? We got to fix these taxes. So Louis had all these cahiers made, these notebooks full of complaints. He gathered them up. He had his advisors and his ministers to go through them and try to find out, what's in here worth complaining about. Did he pay attention or ignore them? He ignored the complaints. Write that down, okay? So, what are the goals of a revolution if France were to have one right now? First and foremost, fairer tax laws. This could have been fixed like that immediately if the king had just acknowledged that the third estate should not have to pay all of the taxes in France. Now, the third estate banded together at the Estates General and began to call themselves by a new name, a lot like the Sons of Liberty, right? Except they called themselves the National Assembly, right? So the first and second estate are already starting to get a little nervous because if you've got a group of guys that now have a banner that they call under, they also have a cause that's giving them a lot of drive, right? So let's keep going. This is absolutely hilarious, right? Now, raise your hand if you have an older brother or sister. I'm not going to lie. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. I want to find out how many of you actually raise your hands. So anyway, what's one of those things that you as an older sibling or your older sibling always used to do to make you mad? I hear a lot of y'all coming up with some good stories, a lot of things going on in your head, right? My brother used to do a lot of goofy things to me. One of the things he loved to do, though, is when he'd send me out on the porch to try and go get some more wood for the wood stove that we had in our house, he'd lock the door. And this is during the middle of the winter, so I'm locked outside, right? It used to drive me insane. Well, Louis the 16th got together with his first estate and second estate buddies at the Estates General and did the exact same thing after he ignored the cahiers and after he ignored these notebooks full of complaints. They locked them out of the next meeting because they knew they were all going to complain about taxes. So they locked them out and hid behind the door and sat there and laughed like little girls and and boys too, whatever. So the third estate was really, really upset by this, and you could honestly say that this event in history is where the French Revolution started because it's the capitalization of their anger, right? They were locked out of the Estates General, so they all went to the only open place they could find, which was an indoor tennis court, and they made an oath where they swore to not disband without getting their demands met, right? Now, they knew at this point, make sure you write this down, they knew at this point that they were going to have to really get violent and revolutionize because the Estates General voting system was completely unfair, right? In the Estates General meetings, when they came up to tax law and they were like, all right, let's vote to see if we're going to get expand taxes to the first and second estate. How many votes did each estate receive? Just one, right? Good job, Laura. Just one, okay? So now Danielle's back there thinking to herself, wait a minute. If each estate only gets one vote, why would the first and second estate ever vote themselves into paying more taxes? Exactly. They didn't. That's why it was so unfair. So the National Assembly now has representatives from the first estate right here, that's a priest, and representatives from the second estate, that's a noble, agreeing with them and saying, hey, man, you're right. We probably should pay taxes, okay? So now this has given their cause even more fire, and now they're just extremely mad. So they decided to try and do something about this. Well, then Louis and his first estate and second estate buddies really screwed up, right? So word, like a rumor, nothing worse than a rumor, right? Started swarming around Paris that the National Guard was going to show up and arrest all of the members of the National Assembly, right? Because there's nothing worse than an idea. If you don't suppress an idea quickly, it's just going to spread, right? Well, these rumors kept flying around all of Paris to a point where 800 members of the National Assembly assembled, you like that, out front of this old medieval fort called the Bastille, right? Now, this Bastille, it's a very large brick building. It's nothing too special, right? But think in your mind, these people that have been paying taxes and they've been oppressed for this entire time, right? They're standing out front of this old medieval building. It is a symbol. It represents the aristocracy. It represents the oppression of the national government, right? That has been around since the Middle Ages, okay? So this medieval fort called the Bastille had actually been turned into a prison, right? So the National Assembly stormed inside of the Bastille after meeting with a couple of the guards to try and negotiate exchanging weapons. But the guards inside were like, dude, we don't have any weapons. And the National Assembly was like, you're a liar. And so they all ran in there to go and get the weapons. Well, they didn't find any weapons. So what's the next best thing? Let's let out all the prisoners. Well, it turns out that there was only 7 prisoners in there, and they were all crazy. So when they let them out, they were all mentally insane. Now, the Marquis de Sade was in there. We'll talk about him tomorrow. But not really that important. So they were in there. They let all the prisoners out, but they were all nuts. So they all just kind of wandered around doing their own little crazy thing, right? So, and then they decided, it was like, all right, well, we got to burn this mother down, right? So they burn the Bastille to the ground, this huge medieval fort. So they're destroying this symbol of oppression, right? On top of that, the guy that they met with, one of the lead guards, the Marquis de Lou, and they met with him and the guy outside, and he ran out of the Bastille because it was burning. And so a huge group of the National Assembly people jumped him and then cut off his head and stuck it on a stick and ran through the streets of Paris with it. Like, it's getting violent, right? And it's only going to get worse. This is tame by comparison to everything else, all right? So, but ironically enough, the French people celebrate this every July 14th when they celebrate Bastille Day. It's like they're July the 4th, right? So, like their Independence Day. So this right here, that's the Parisians storming the Bastille. They brought a cannon with them and shot down the exterior wall so they could get inside. So that right there is the Bastille on fire. And then this is what it looks like in Paris on every July 14th now when they celebrate their Bastille Day. So they shoot off all these fireworks and they celebrate their revolution against their oppressive government, right? So I love this story, and I hope you guys are getting into it too. And we will talk more about this subject tomorrow, especially the death and this kind of stuff. All right, so I'll see y'all then. Have a good evening.